Carol Browner is the top White House advisor on energy and climate change. Welcome this morning, Ms. Browner. I want to ask you about those initial estimates, which were important because you need to know how much oil is coming out to know about the cleanup. Mr. Dudley blames the government for those initial estimates. Your response?
Well, it's important to understand that BP has a financial interest in what those flow rates are. They will ultimately pay a fine based on those rates. That's why we brought in an independent team. We did not include BP in the estimates that were made available this week, the 12,000 to 19,000. That team is going to continue to work. It is hard to do. They have to look at three factors. They have to look at the plume rate, the insertion, and the surface modeling.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but did they lie? Or were they the government estimates at the beginning that were being relied on?
The very, very first estimates came from BP. They had the footage of the plume. The government then did satellite imagery, and we realized that those estimates were not accurate.
Let me ask you about something else about this next effort. The president's talked about the risk associated with it. Mr. Dudley says it's less risky than the top kill method that just failed. Are they downplaying the risk here?
I think what the American people need to know that it is possible we will have oil leaking from this well until August, when the relief wells will be finished. I think it's important for the American people to know that we directed BP to drill a second relief well to ensure we had redundancy in what will be the permanent closure.
How much oil?
Well, when they cut the riser, our experts are telling us it may be as much as 20% more oil. Once they get the cap on, then we have now, and that will be for a period of about 4 to 7 days while they move the cap into place, which has been pre-staged. 2 caps have been pre-staged on the ocean floor. Look, we want people, all the information we have, we want to make available to the American people. They have a right to know, and we're going to honor that. So what our experts are saying is that when you cut the riser, the kink may be holding some of the oil in, and so we could see an increase. Our experts are saying as much as 20%. Once the cap is on, the question is how snug is that fit? If it's a snug fit, then there could be very, very little oil. If they're not able to get as snug a fit, then there could be more. But what we're doing is we're going to hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
What is the worst?
The worst is that we have oil leaking until August, until these relief wells are done, and we will be prepared for the worst.
What if the relief wells don't work?
Well, I think there's every reason to think that they will, but we have a redundancy. We didn't trust just one. We ordered them to drill a second one. This is technology that has been used for decades. It's used around the world, and so they are making progress. The first one is ahead of schedule. They had slated that to be concluded or finished in mid-August. It's about 10 days ahead of schedule now. Doesn't mean it won't fall behind. It's ahead for the moment.
We've seen the president mention several times instances in which BP wasn't being forthcoming, I think was the word he used this morning. We now have a disagreement between who indeed was measuring those first flows of oil. How do you work with somebody you don't trust?
This is obviously a difficult situation, but it's important for people to understand that from the beginning, the government has been in charge. We have been directing BP to take important steps. We have a brain trust led by our Secretary of Energy, Dr. Chu, who in fact it was that group of people yesterday who looked at the information we had gotten from Top Kill and realized that it was too dangerous to continue to proceed to put pressure down into that well, that things could happen that would make the situation worse. So and that's why we're moving on.
The government told BP to stop?
We told them of our very, very grave concerns, yes, absolutely.
And they listened?
Yes,
obviously.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this question. The president said that despite these differences of opinion about the initial estimate flow, that he said that, quote, that didn't change what our response was in the beginning. How can that be so?
Well, we always planned for the worst. From the beginning, we assumed that this could be worse. We started mobilizing immediately. We met with the president the day the rig fell to explain the situation. He stayed engaged. We have to plan for the worst, and we are planning. We are activating for the worst, and we will continue to do that, working with the governors and with the parish presidents.
In testimony, scientists, though, have said, those low estimates, there wasn't enough of a planning for the worst, that those initial low estimates were a problem because, we have these huge lakes of oil under the surface no one can see. And if we'd had an accurate number, we would have known, hey, this oil's going somewhere, we got to go look for it. The fact that we didn't know that was a real big problem.
Well, they're continuing to study the plumes under the sea. We need to get better information about that. We've got NOAA vessels out there studying them. We do need to understand that. But in the meantime, as the oil comes to the surface, I think it's important to understand what resources are out there. There are the burns, which have been hugely successful, more than 80 burns now, where you corral the oil, you actually ignite it, and you volatilize it. There are the skimmers. The skimmers have now removed almost 11 billion, I think more than 11 billion barrels of oil and water. And then there's what you do as it starts to come ashore. shore.
We've been talking about worst case scenarios. The president said that the oil companies didn't have their act together when it came to worst case scenarios. That's one of the realizations he's made in this disaster. How soon did he make that realization?
I think fairly early on, we all came to realize that there were situations that could unfold that hadn't been adequately thought through. That's why we've suspended all drilling in the deep water drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. That's why there is a commission, and that's why there will be investigations. We cannot resume these activities until we can assure the American people that they are safe. You know, we don't know, was this technological failure or human failure?
Right.
Maybe both. Once we understand that, we will have to ensure the American people that it can be done safely, and if there is an accident, that it can be responded to rapidly.
So if the president was very quickly realizing that the oil companies had not been straight about the size of the disaster, why then did he also cite as one of the failures not pressing the oil, BP in this case, fast enough on the amount of oil that was coming out? If he'd had this early realization, they weren't being straight.
We were pressing them. I think what the president said in his press conference is that when we look back over the last 35, 38 days, we do realize there are some places where we could have moved more aggressively. One of them was asking for all of the data which we needed to do these flows. But it is important for people to understand BP has a vested financial interest in downplaying the size of this. We are on top of it. We have the best minds looking at it. And we're not just looking at a video. We're looking at satellite imagery. We're looking at what's actually being brought up through the risers into the boat that was there. And we will continue to monitor the situation. We want to know, and the American people have a right to know, how much oil is spilling.
Talking to people who've had to deal with other kinds of disasters, they say that there's a moment when everybody's been following the playbook that's in place. When somebody says, you know what, we need an entirely new playbook, that we need to think in an entirely new kind of way here. Has that moment happened, and if so, when did it happen?
Well, I think it's been happening with each step. The first goal was, obviously, we always knew the relief wells were the long-term solution. The first thing was, could we get this contained quickly? That cofferdam didn't work. The second was, could you actually kill the well so it wasn't leaking while the relief well was being drilled? And now we've moved to the third. So at each instance, we have been pressing, we have been analyzing, we have been using our best minds. We have a brain trust to give us the best answers, to keep adjusting to the reality.
Let me, one question about adjusting to reality. Dispersants are being used. There was argument about a specific toxic one. I want to ask you about all dispersants. There is worry, and can you assure us that the use of dispersants isn't saving the beaches but ruining the water column?
There is monitoring going on. Lisa Jackson at the Environmental Protection Agency is on top of this. People should understand that there is a preset list of authorized dispersants. This was chosen from that. But we are using an amount of dispersant that has never been used before. Jackson has flagged this for the American people. The Administrator Jackson has flagged this. She has directed BP to use less of this.
So, but still to be determined whether this amount is harmful in the end.
It is being studied. If we have reason to believe that even less should be used, Jackson will issue the appropriate order.
Wonderful. Carol Browner, thanks so much.